I'm Wayne Davis, Chairman of the Board of Train Riders Northeast, an all-volunteer rail advocacy group. Formed in 1989 to explore the possibility of having Amtrak extend service from Boston to Portland, Maine, as the first step to restoring passenger service in northern New England. In late 1988, I'd written a letter to then Amtrak President Graham Claytor, complaining about the condition of the fairly new Amfleet equipment, burned out reading lights in the coaches, and the poor condition of the restrooms on a trip to New York. After my complaint, I ended the letter with a, nevertheless, what would we have to do to have Amtrak extend service from Boston to Portland, so that I don't have to drive to Boston to board an Amtrak train. About 10 days later, I received a personal letter from President Claytor apologizing for the condition of the equipment and sharing what he intended to do to correct things. Following his suggestion, I placed an ad in our newspaper inviting folks to come to the bank that employed me to discuss the issue and enjoy refreshments. 21 people showed up and ultimately became the first board of directors of a group we named Train Riders Northeast. Our first activity was to collect public opinions on Election Day and share the results with Mr. Claytor. Obviously, the results were positive and were followed by our initial trip to Washington on the night owl. At Union Station in Washington, we introduced Maine's Commissioner of Transportation, several of Train Riders board members, and me to Mr. Claytor and a conference room full of multiple Amtrak department heads. After wrapping up that meeting, we met with all the members of Maine's congressional delegation. Maine's U.S. Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell ultimately became our sponsor. Prior to Election Day 1990, our volunteers collected over 90,000 signatures in Maine supporting our rail bill, which led the Maine legislature to adopt our citizen-initiated bill for the first time in Maine's history. Though it took 12 years before a wheel turned, working closely with Amtrak senior management, Federal Railroad Administration, Federal Transit Administration, directors, and congressional delegations in Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts, the Downeaster inaugural took place on December 14, 2001. Train riders arranged what Governor Angus King called Operation Bell, which began with the ringing of church bells in Boston as our Amtrak Downeaster departed, and as the train entered townships along the route. Thanks to cell phones, the bells rang in all station stop communities in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine to welcome the new Amtrak service. As the train crossed the New Hampshire-Maine state line, the train blew its horn, and as it entered Maine, everyone on the train noted a moose family standing on the edge of a farmyard adjacent to the track. There was great laughter as the word was passed throughout the train that Governor King had loudly announced, "Cue the moose," the moment he spotted them. As the new service took hold, it was obvious that Train Riders Northeast enjoyed a special relationship with Amtrak. That relationship brought 7 presidents of Amtrak, 2 chairmen of the Amtrak Board of Directors, and most of the other top Amtrak management to Portland over the years as speakers at Train Riders' annual meetings and our special events. Our members were guides on the Amtrak History Train when it was touring America and was in Freeport, Maine over a weekend. As Amtrak celebrates 50 years of service, we are proud to point out that Train Riders has been a partner with Amtrak for 33 of those years. Maine's delegation has vigorously promoted Amtrak service since the days when Maine's Senator George Mitchell was the majority leader. When he retired from the Senate, Maine's Senator Olympia Snowe became the Amtrak champion. She was followed by Maine Senators Susan Collins and Angus King, who even today continue to respond to Amtrak's important growing needs. Our efforts were the driving force that not only made Amtrak's Downeaster service possible, but we also drew up the legislation that led to the creation of the Northern New England Passenger Rail Authority, who expertly manages Amtrak's Downeaster service, creating what 3 Amtrak presidents have said should serve as examples for the nation on how to manage trains, which has created what Trains magazine and others have called America's favorite train. Today's event brings up many memories of other noteworthy happenings. Before the Acela trains were created, we were fortunate to have been included in the test trials of Sweden's X2000. Next was the ice train from Germany, which was being tested in the corridor. We sponsored its visit to Portland for a public open house with music provided by the Maine Tyrolean Band, which made the chief executive officer of the German National Railways very emotional. At the end of the day, I and 8 members of our board were invited to ride the ice train to Boston. Later, we were included in the tour of Spain's Talgo train, which was touring America, which Amtrak arranged to carry members of the National Association of Railroad Passengers to its first membership meeting in Maine. Train Riders board members were sworn to secrecy and were invited to tour the Vermont facility that was building Amtrak's Acela train sets, even before the general public had seen them. The unveiling of the Acela was the most exciting event ever held to celebrate Amtrak's entry into high-speed trains, and held in a New York theater for all Amtrak employees and Train Riders Northeast as well. The recent news about the next generation of train sets currently under construction is a tangible sign that Amtrak intends to be a major player in providing modern, safe, efficient, and comfortable transportation. Our senators have called passenger train travel the last bit of civilized travel on the planet. There are so many stories. George Warrington leaving Washington by air in the morning to visit Boston's South Station and Train Riders' annual meeting in Portland. And then Boston, Manchester, and Portland were fogged in, and his planes circled until they were nearly out of fuel. Fortunately, Manchester's airport cleared, they landed for fuel, and took off for Portland as the fog closed in again. More circling around Portland, and then finally George called South Station to ask the terminal manager to drive to Portland to deliver his address, which he had his secretary fax to the Boston terminal. Our annual meeting was being held that year in the Doubletree Hotel, which is in the flight path of our airport, and every time a plane flew over the hotel, someone in the dining room would holler out, "There goes George again." Of course, if the Downeaster track improvements had been completed and the Downeaster operating, no problem. And then there's the one Amtrak president who contracted pneumonia and a high fever upon his arrival in Portland, and my family physician was called upon. All ended well. And then in the early 90s, when I was vice president of the National Association of Rail Passengers and traveled coast to coast for meetings, I wrote up all of my trips and sent them to Amtrak officials, riding on all long-distance trains and silver service. I made the coast-to-coast trip 12 times in 33 years. Happy birthday, Amtrak, and we wish you another 50 years of great service to the United States.